Deep inside a stack of engineering logs and decades-old circuit diagrams, a NASA engineer noticed something nobody else had caught in nearly 20 years. A tiny detail buried in Voyager 1's own data that suggested a set of thrusters everyone had written off as permanently dead might not actually be dead at all. That single observation kicked off a race against the clock, one that had to be won before a scheduled shutdown on Earth cut off contact with the spacecraft entirely for the better part of a year. This is the story of what NASA actually found buried in Voyager 1's data recently, why it mattered so much more than a routine engineering fix, and how a nearly 50-year-old spacecraft, communicating in signals that take almost a full day just to arrive, managed to pull off what one mission engineer flatly called yet another miracle save. Stick around, because the detective work behind this discovery is genuinely one of the more remarkable engineering stories to come out of the entire Voyager program. And if you want to catch every update as this incredible mission continues, go ahead and hit follow before we get into it. To understand why this discovery mattered so much, you first need to understand exactly what was at stake and how little margin for error NASA's engineers actually had. Voyager 1 relies on small thrusters to keep its antenna pointed precisely at Earth, a task that becomes more critical, not less, the farther the spacecraft travels. Over the decades, some of these thrusters had become clogged with residue from their own propellant, a slow, gradual degradation that mission engineers had been managing for years. Among the systems affected were what are known as the primary roll thrusters, a set of backup thrusters that had been considered completely dead for almost 2 decades, written off as unusable due to what appeared to be a permanent hardware failure deep within the spacecraft's aging systems. Then, while reviewing the situation, one of the mission's engineers had a genuine insight, one that ran counter to years of accumulated assumption. Todd Barber, the mission's propulsion lead at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, later described the moment plainly, explaining that these thrusters were considered dead, and that conclusion had been entirely legitimate based on everything the team knew at the time. But buried in the spacecraft's own telemetry was a subtle clue suggesting a different, more specific explanation. Rather than a genuine, unfixable hardware failure, the team began to suspect that an unexpected change in the circuits controlling the thruster's internal heaters had effectively flipped an electronic switch into the wrong position years earlier. If that theory was correct, the thrusters themselves might still be perfectly functional. They simply needed their heaters switched back on, restoring the specific operating temperature the thrusters require in order to fire safely and effectively. That kind of insight is exactly the sort of thing that sounds almost too simple once you say it out loud, and yet finding it required someone to go back through years of accumulated engineering data, spot an anomaly nobody else had specifically connected to this particular problem, and propose a fix for hardware that had been formally classified as unrecoverable for the better part of 2 decades. Barber summed up the moment with genuine appreciation for how unlikely a discovery like that actually is, calling it, quite simply, another miracle, save for a mission that has already produced more than its fair share of them. But identifying the likely cause was only half the challenge. Actually fixing it meant executing a precisely timed sequence of commands, all while working within one of the most punishing communication delays humanity has ever had to deal with. Voyager 1 currently sits so far from Earth that a single radio signal takes over 23 hours just to reach the spacecraft, and another full day for any response to travel back. There's no room for real-time troubleshooting, no ability to send a quick follow-up command if something goes slightly wrong. Every single instruction has to be planned, verified, and transmitted with the full understanding that nearly 2 days will pass before anyone on the ground even knows whether it worked. Making the situation even more urgent was a separate, entirely unrelated deadline bearing down on the mission at the exact same time. Deep Space Station 43, located in Canberra, Australia, is the only antenna on Earth powerful enough to reliably send commands to both Voyager spacecraft. That antenna was scheduled to go offline for a lengthy series of upgrades stretching from May of 2025 through February of 2026, with only brief, limited windows of operation available during that entire stretch. According to Suzanne Dodd, Voyager's project manager and director of the Interplanetary Network at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, those upgrades were necessary for reasons well beyond the Voyager mission itself, supporting future crewed lunar landings and expanding communication. Capacity for other deep space science missions, some of which are directly building on discoveries Voyager itself helped make possible. But that meant the teams investigating the thruster issue had a hard, immovable deadline. Whatever needed fixing had to be fixed before that antenna went dark for the better part of a year, or the opportunity would simply be gone for a long, uncertain stretch of time. There was an added layer of urgency buried inside the fix itself. The team needed to restart the thruster heaters and confirm they were working again before Voyager 1's star tracker, The instrument responsible for keeping the spacecraft oriented correctly by locking onto a specific guide star drifted too far out of alignment. If that drift went uncorrected for too long, it would automatically trigger the very same long-dormant thrusters the team was trying to carefully revive, potentially firing them unexpectedly before engineers had confirmed they were actually safe and ready to use again. On March 20th, the team finally sent their carefully prepared sequence of commands and then waited. Given Voyager 1's distance, that meant enduring the better part of 2 full days, before any confirmation could possibly arrive, watching a stream of data slowly make its way back across more than 15 billion miles of empty space. When the results finally came in, they confirmed exactly what the team had hoped for. The thrusters, dead for nearly 20 years by every prior assessment, fired successfully, restoring a critical layer of backup capability to a spacecraft that has been operating for decades longer than anyone involved in its original design ever expected it to. What makes this story so compelling isn't simply that NASA fixed an old piece of hardware. It's what the discovery represents about how this mission actually continues to function nearly 50 years after launch. Voyager 1 wasn't built with modern diagnostic systems, or the kind of remote troubleshooting capability engineers take for granted on newer spacecraft. Every fix, every recovery, every unexpected insight has to come from patient, careful analysis of decades of accumulated data, cross-referenced against circuit diagrams and engineering records from a spacecraft designed and built in the 1970s, executed by a team working with communication delays that make even the simplest confirmation an exercise in extended patience. This particular save also highlights something easy to overlook about a mission this old, that new discoveries about Voyager don't always come from freshly recorded data, streaming in from the edge of interstellar space. Sometimes they come from engineers going back through the mission's own archives and older telemetry, spotting a pattern or an anomaly that nobody had specifically connected to a known problem before, and realizing that a piece of hardware everyone assumed was permanently lost might actually still have life left in it. It's a form of discovery that has less to do with encountering something new out in the depths of space, and everything to do with finally understanding something that had actually been sitting in the data all along, waiting for the right person to notice it. This kind of careful, patient troubleshooting matters enormously because Voyager 1's remaining lifespan is genuinely limited. The spacecraft runs on a radioisotope thermoelectric generator, a power source that produces a small amount of electricity from the natural decay of radioactive material, and that output diminishes a little more every single year. NASA engineers have already had to permanently shut down several of Voyager 1's scientific instruments over the past few years, carefully prioritizing which systems stay powered as the available energy budget continues to shrink. Every additional year of functionality the team manages to preserve, whether through careful power management or through creative fixes, like reviving thrusters presumed dead for 2 decades, extends the window for gathering more of the kind of data that simply cannot be collected any other way. Voyager 1 continues to approach its own next milestone even as all of this unfolds. On November 18th, 2026, the spacecraft is expected to become the first human-made object in history to reach a distance of exactly 1 light day from Earth, a point so remote that a radio signal traveling at the fastest speed physically possible still takes a full 24 hours just to arrive. Voyager 1 and its twin, Voyager 2, remain the only spacecraft ever to operate outside the heliosphere, the protective bubble of particles and magnetic fields generated by our Sun, and every additional mile either spacecraft travels adds to an already unmatched decades-long record of firsts. There's something genuinely remarkable about the fact that a spacecraft engineered in the 1970s, running on rapidly aging hardware and communicating across a gap that grows wider every single day, can still produce genuine surprises, not through some dramatic new cosmic encounter, but through the quiet, careful process of engineers revisiting old data and finding something everyone else had missed. It's a reminder that Voyager's most valuable resource isn't just its instruments or its position at the literal edge of human exploration. It's the sheer depth of data the mission has accumulated over nearly half a century, an archive so vast and so thoroughly documented that it can still yield genuine surprises to anyone patient enough to go looking through it carefully. NASA officials have been candid about the fact that time remains the biggest constraint facing this mission going forward, with realistic estimates suggesting both spacecraft could continue functioning for perhaps only a few more years before their power supplies finally drop too low to keep any instruments running at all. That makes every successful recovery, every unexpected insight buried in the data, and every extra year of continued operation genuinely precious, extending humanity's only direct, ongoing connection to the space between the stars for just a little bit longer. If a story like this, an engineer spotting a tiny clue buried in decades-old data and using it to bring supposedly dead hardware back to life across a communication delay of nearly 2 full days, is the kind of thing that genuinely fascinates you, go ahead and subscribe. Drop a comment letting me know what part of this recovery impressed you the most, and stick around because there's a very real chance this remarkable, aging spacecraft still has more surprises hiding in its own data.